Hi, Roy here, and welcome to another edition of the Right Has Left podcast. Thanks for joining me. On this edition, I have a lot of information and news to talk about. First, in breaking news, Ross Baraka, the mayor of New York, New Jersey, has been released from custody after ICE agents arrested him for protesting. Him along with some other Democrats. These are major Democrats that were involved in this protest. A very peaceful protest. However, ICE agents said that he was interfering and he was standing his ground, so the ICE agents arrested him, but he did finally get out of custody and jail. The protest, it was for an opening of a private prison that was long closed. And as we all know, Trump is now opening up all these private prisons and contracting them out to various people, major one organization. And I'm going to be talking about that in my podcast, so stay tuned. So that has been some breaking news. Now let's get along and talk about some other stuff that's going on here with the Trump administration. On the right has left. Top Trump advisor, Stephen Miller. We all know about him. He's the one that's trying to get school children to conform to his ideology, basically Project 2025, and get rid of other things like DEI because it's all communism, according to him. But anyway, Stephen Miller told reporters recently that the administration is looking at ways to end due process protections for unauthorized immigrants who are in the country. The Constitution, however, is clear in that, of course, is that by Supreme Court law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, and this is what they're trying to get rid of, can be suspended at a time of act of war or invasion. So he says we're being invaded by immigration that is illegal because these immigrants are all criminals. Every single one of them, in his opinion, are criminals, although that is not true. So he would say that that's an action that we're actively looking at. Now, Miller made this statement in front of the White House driveway. Now, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. Miller said if we do, do away with habeas corpus. Now, a clause in the Constitution says due process protections can be suspended during an invasion, so that's what they're trying to convince the Supreme Court. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless in the cases of rebellion or invasion. The public safety may require that. The United States Constitution says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, and that the Supreme Court has long recognized that the non-citizens have certain basic rights, but Trump complained that those protections take away too much time. And I don't know if I'm going to obey the Constitution or not. He actually said that in a recent interview. He says that's up to his lawyers. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials, he said, adding that some of the people the administration wants to deport are murderers and drugs and drug dealers. Now, the problem with this, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact of the matter that if you do away with the writ of habeas corpus for these immigrants, and they're not going to get due process, if that's done away with, it's just not going to affect immigration and the immigrants. If Trump does away with that, that can affect also you and I. Now, think about that for a minute. Because if that is suspended due to the fact that we are in an act of war, can you imagine if you're an American citizen yet your last name is Rodriguez or some other Hispanic name, or the fact that in the case of this one person, you're pulled over for a taillight that does not work, and then you're detained by ICE because then they now think that you're an illegal immigrant, even though that you are a citizen of the United States and have been since you're 4 years old, with the case of this one person. If the writ of habeas corpus is done away with, you don't have the right to even go before a judge and say, hey, this is a mistake or something. They can lock your ass up and throw away the key, basically, and they'll deal with you when they want to deal with you. Do you think that is scary? It is, because Trump once stated that, well, there were 3 other presidents that used this and did away with the writ of habeas corpus, but, we were in a world war. And that's why that was done away with. So it's going to be interesting. So We'll have to see where that goes with Stephen Miller. This guy, ladies and gentlemen, is weird. I don't know how else to put it. I did a previous podcast of him talking about, what he wants to do with school children. He wants a uniform type of methodology to be taught in schools. And it's almost, well, I'm not going to go there, but just think about the 1939 to 1940s and how some of those children in Germany were, uniformed to train to think one way and not another. And I don't know if that's going to come to that or not, but it's scary. And Stephen Miller and his talk about doing away with the writ of habeas corpus, and he said Trump actually had a discussion with him, is folks, that just going to lead us to more of an authoritarian United States. And, my headline news that I just recently talked about, he wants to, perhaps get some of these Democrats who are also in this protest arrested because they were interfering with ICE things that were going on with that prison, getting that prison ready to open up. And if you interfere with ICE, which is a no-no, then you should be arrested too. So I don't know. So I have a lot of problems with that. Let's move on with other news. Yes, Mr. Hegseth is back in the news again. The military is getting ready to remove trans troops by approval of the Supreme Court to Trump. So if they're going to remove these trans troops and use medical records to do so, well, Pete Hegseth is going to follow up with that and get them out of here. The Pentagon will remove as many as 1,000 service members, according to Pete Hegseth. The U.S. Defense Secretary has ordered the removal of them, and he wants the others to self-report if they'll do so they can get out of the military. So if you're not going to do it voluntarily, then he will remove you involuntarily. Department officials have said that it is difficult to determine exactly how many transgender service members are there, but medical records will show those who have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, show symptoms, or are being treated for gender identity. Those troops would then be forced out of the military. The others, as I mentioned, have 30 days to self-report on a new directive that he issued this past week. Again, I don't know. There is one case of a woman who is transgender, or a woman. They have an excellent service record. This particular Navy pilot has had over 30 successful missions, has risked her life. And I'm going to say her because it was a guy transferring into a woman. She's a successful naval pilot, has sacrificed her life for our freedom here in the United States. She has done several bombing missions, and they're just going to throw her butt out. That's too bad. You're transgender, so we don't like you. So I think you need to perhaps get out of the service, according to Pete Hegseth. So there you go. Trump, of course, he's back in the news with some of his trade deals. Donald Trump says that he had a breakthrough trade deal with the United Kingdom and have agreed that slashing some of the prices down to only 10% tariffs on cars and aluminum and steel. And the UK agreed to that. And the Prime Minister of UK said the deal would save thousands of British jobs. Keir Starmer said it was a fantastic historical day as he announced the agreement, the first by the White House since Trump announced sweeping global tariffs. Of course, we all know that he is presently talking to China as well. The problem is that these 10% tariffs on cars like the BMW, and U.S. automakers say, well, that's good for the United Kingdom and BMW, but what's that going to do for us? Why? Because the U.S. Automakers Union states that there are still hefty tariffs at over 25% on U.S. car parts made in Canada and Mexico still. And they're going to be paying higher prices due to those Canadian and Mexican tariffs for parts. And they're not really happy with that. So how is this helping the United States, Mr. President? I know you still got to do some deals there, but how is that helping the U.S. car manufacturers? You gave a nice break to England on BMW, but the U.S. automakers here still have those high tariffs. So there you go. Now, J.D. Vance, in other news, has said that the U.S. will not intervene with the conflict between Pakistan and India, calling fighting between the two nuclear powers fundamentally none of our business. That was just last week. Now, however, we know that J.D. Vance is in extreme critical conversations, and hopefully they got something worked out between Pakistan and India, and that has to do with trade, between the two. Again, they're using trade to maybe calm down the problems between the two countries, and there has been a ceasefire. So, I always will give credit where credit is due. This whole program is just not bashing the Trump administration, although 90% of it is things that I question. But when they do something good, I'm going to talk about it. I mean, I'm transparent, and perhaps this has been some kind of a good deal to de-escalate the conflict. And if they have worked out something, then good for them. So, we'll see what happens there. I'm happy to, like I said, I'll give credit where credit is due. Some other news that's been going on: the House has passed legislation, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was part of this, and I'll be talking about her too shortly. She's back in the news again. But the House has passed their version and approval of renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Trump thinks it's already done because they got to go on now to the Senate to approve this. So I found that kind of interesting that we are going to get further ramifications and doing away with the Gulf of Mexico and support it by calling it the Gulf of America. Although, as I have shown, about 75% of the Gulf runs along the Gulf of the country of Mexico. So that's why it was called the Gulf of Mexico in the first place. Only the top portion and then runs along, the Louisiana and the Texas and Alabama coast there on over to down to Florida. So, but they want to call it Gulf of America, so be it. Now, the measure was supported, as I mentioned, by Marjorie Taylor Greene. It passed nearly along party lines. Of course, the Democrats opposed, and almost every Republican, with the exception of Nebraska Representative Don Bacon, voted in favor of it. Don thought this was kind of like nonsense. That's why he didn't support it. So, anyway. Now, we got to go back a little bit to Mr. Garcia. The Trump administration is evoking the state secrets privilege. He's coming up with anything and everything he can not to talk about Garcia in an apparent attempt to avoid answering a judge's questions about the mistakes that was made in the deportation of Garcia to El Salvador. So it's now state secrets. We don't want to talk about that. So, I can't just see us really having any conversations about that. So there you go with that. State secrets. We don't have to tell you what we did with Garcia and how that all came about. Yes. All right. I mentioned earlier Marjorie Taylor Greene. And speaking about her, the senators are now waving off firebrand Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene's attempts and discussions that perhaps she wants to run in next year in this Georgia State Senate race. They were voicing some concerns of the crazy things that she's been doing, and it might come back to hurt her in the general election. Well, since this story broke, again, now Marjorie has backed off on her attempt to perhaps run for the governor of Georgia or running for the state Senate seat. Now she says, no, I guess I better not do that, because I am sure that everybody gathered around her and said, what the hell are you thinking? Because of her weird things that she does in conversations when she does committee hearings and things like that. She says some of the most outlandish things, and she's really not educated in politics, but she loves to do it because she knows she gets the camera on her and she gets her 15 seconds of fame when she does it. So there you go. But if they said that if she's seriously looking at a Senate race, she needs to rethink it because, she would probably win the primary. They all agree about that. But when it came down to the general election, she'd probably lose her butt in a landslide given to the Democrats, which I don't mind. But, they know where her bread and butter is. And that is basically staying in the House of Representatives. Because we all remember the fiasco when Herschel Walker ran in the 2022 Georgia Senate race, and you saw where that wound up. So that's what they're thinking about. So I find that some of this news about her, she is just so unusually crazy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she says some of the most outlandish things as a professional politician in these Republican and House hearings. People just look at her like, what the hell are you thinking? And her constituents say the same thing. So, there you go. All right, moving on to other news, and this is kind of cool stuff. I mean, it really is. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, now known as Pope Leo XIV, is the first pope from the United States, and he's a 69-year-old from Chicago. He's known as a leader with global experience. He spent much of his career as a missionary in South America, and most recently led a very powerful Vatican office for bishop appointments. Now, his election represents continuity with papacy of Pope Francis, as who recently passed away, and he is expected to continue Francis's reforms of the church, as well as his focus on poverty and marginalized people. Thus, his chosen name as Leo. So, I'm not rehashing old news, but what I think is kind of unusual about him, although he's an American. The Pope kind of is downplaying that. He says, I'm for all people, because Trump came out and, we got an American Pope now. Things are going to change. That's not true. In fact, it's just the opposite. He went on to say that, I may be an American, but I've spent most of my adult life, working for the poor in other countries. He left Chicago a long, long time ago. Now, he's technically the least American of all American cardinals. Prevost was born in Chicago, but inside the Vatican is where he's been for most of his life, and he eventually worked, and he was considered one of the least American of all the U.S. cardinals. He worked for a decade, as we all know, in Peru. He speaks very fluent Spanish and Italian, both of which he displayed during his first address to the public in St. Peter's Square. He is well regarded by Pope Francis, and that's why he's going to continue on with his work. And he respected him very highly. Clearly, Pope Francis saw in him something, and he is a very capable leader. So Pope Leo XIV is now our new pope, and I think it's going to be just interesting, him being a pope with the a capability of being able to speak very, very fluent English, as well as other types of things that he can do. I mentioned about something here in a previous video that I did. Why this guy? Why the first pope from America? And it's this is what I really think why all the cardinals chose Robert Prevost from Chicago. And that is because of what's going on in the Trump administration with all these very, very fast-moving and detaining all these immigrants. The Catholic Church totally supports those who are oppressed, and immigrants are. While it is very true, and again, I like to be transparent, that there are some of these immigrants who have criminal records and they've gotten out of prisons, like from El Salvador, and moved up through Mexico and got into the United States. That is a very fact, and both Democrats as well as Republicans, support that. But the problem is ICE is on a rampage of not fact checking and just detaining anybody and everybody they can, kind of like the Gestapo. And a lot of these folks are U.S. citizens, have no criminal records other than maybe a traffic ticket or something, and yet they're being detained. Now, that's where the Pope comes in, and he's going to use the influence of the Catholic Church, which is extremely powerful worldwide, to tell the Trump administration, you really need to rethink your strategy on this. And I'm sure the Pope is going to get Trump's ear, and if he doesn't, then we're going to have some problems, because I really think that's why the Cardinals went with an American Pope, is they have strong concerns of what's going on over in the United States, and you really can't blame them, because it's scary, and our new Pope realizes that. So we'll have to see where that goes, but that's really my opinion as to why the Cardinals, of all the people they had able to perhaps look at, is why they selected an American Pope, is to maybe run some checks and balances with the Trump administration, because obviously the Democrats, who have absolutely zero power in both the House and the Senate, can't do a damn thing, as much as they're trying, other than give lip service to the American people and trying to rally up the citizens to saying this is what's going on. And in fact, as we all know, in just recent news here, Trump has totally shut down FEMA, and even Huckabee of the state of Arkansas was trying to get federal disaster aid because of all the recent tornadoes that have occurred in the state of Arkansas. And she was even shut down. They're not giving her a damn dime. And she was like, what? A very red state like Arkansas. And Trump doesn't give a damn. No disaster relief for anybody. There were several other states that applied for disaster relief, flooding in Washington, Arkansas, North Carolina, and they didn't get a dime. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. Moving on to other news. Yes. Guess what? Another Fox host. Let me get back to this. So Donald Trump announced Thursday he was appointing Fox News host and former prosecutor Jeannie Pirro, the interim U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., after his first pick faced what appeared to be insurmountable pushback from the Republicans on Capitol Hill. So he says, I am pleased to announce that Judge Jeannie Pirro will be appointed to the interim United States attorney for the District of Columbia. Trump wrote on Truth Social, touting her as the first woman elected to several previous positions and calling her a very powerful crusader for victims of crime. She has excelled in all ways, said Trump, and praising her for her television career. In addition to her legal career, she, of course, was on Fox News, Justice with Judge Jeannie for 10 years, and is currently co-host of The Five, one of the highest-rated shows on television. But she won't be there anymore, obviously, as Trump continues to suck talent off of the Fox News network. And she's a longtime Trump ally, obviously, who was a regular presence at Mar-a-Lago even before she ran for president the first time. She earned a quick praise from the GOP senator who had derailed the nomination of Ed Martin, Trump's first pick for the role. Again, he goes to the well of Fox because Fox Network, very conservative, treats him very well, and he starts to pick other people from Fox. So, Pereira will be the Attorney General for Washington, D.C., and, of course, we know he doesn't like Washington, D.C., even though the White House and the Capitol there, all the government runs out of Washington, D.C., but as a district, he doesn't like it because it's Democratic. And so we'll see. He's going to put her in there, who will just sit there and hold hands with the Attorney General and Pam Bondi and everybody else up there. So again, you get these people. It's just like the Surgeon General. He doesn't even have he's not even they're not even a doctor. Had no experience, but you get an Attorney General who doesn't have any medical experience. He just puts all these people in there because they've all been loyal and faithful to him. So there you go. We're going to have all these wonderful people in the White House. And now you got Piero from Fox. I don't know who else he's going to steal from Fox to put in the White House in his administration, but we'll see. Some other good news: the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or as it was known as SAFE, House Bill 128-22, passed the House by a narrow margin of 220 to 28 on April 10th, 2025, as we all know. But the SAVE Act went on to the Senate, and guess what? They filibustered it, and it has stalled, so it hasn't gone anywhere. Thank God. It needs 60 votes and to pass under the current filibuster rules. Though this is a high bar, the threat of its passage still kind of remains. It's bad for election officials, and it's bad for democracy. The SAVE Act on its surface requires proof of citizenship for registering to vote in all federal elections. However, existing law already is there for that. So why are they doing this? Because they want to make sure that voters and vote by mail and get stalled. And they found a loophole that where many females who have recently married also cannot vote because their birth certificate may be different than their name. So they have to dig around for that. But all federal registration forms for voting does include a checkbox requiring residents to positively affirm a citizenship. Violating that is punishable, and instances of non-citizens voting is exceedingly rare. But they think that they have to have the SAVE Act in place to do that. Instead of solving a real problem, the SAVE Act would have disastrous effects on our work, election officials, workloads, and eligible voters across the nation. The SAVE Act would require all voters to provide and document proof of citizenship, such as a passport or a birth certificate with a photo ID. And in most cases, anytime they register or update their registration, a real ID would not be acceptable, which we now know is in effect the real ID. It's only proof of a lawful residence, not citizenship. Nor would military IDs without accompanying documentation like a birth certificate would work. What's more, as the law is written, suggests a proof that person has to vote in person. So, again, the SAVE Act has stalled in the Senate, but this was disastrous for a lot of women who, if this was to pass, they'd have to come up with something because their birth certificates are totally different than their married name. And of course, now a lot of states says that's not a big issue in this day and age, but in fact it is. So an electorate volunteer at a voting booth, and when you come to vote, could easily say, well, that's not the same name there, so you can't vote. And that's pretty scary, if you ask me. So I really have concerns about that. I really, really do. Now, let's go to our top story for our podcast. And I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about in our top story. And that is the deal with these state prisons. As you are fully aware, Donald Trump wants to reopen Alcatraz, which is absolutely crazy because of the thousands, if not millions. I don't even know why I said thousands. It would cost millions of dollars to reopen Alcatraz. And I'm going to talk about these prisons because there hasn't been a lot of news about it until you saw this protest in Newark, New Jersey, which, that ICE and Trump is getting ready to open up this closed down prison. It's been closed for quite a while. And there's a lot of notorious private prisons that have had histories of abuse to prisoners, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and they've been closed down and have been closed down. But now Trump has opened them all up again, just like prison camps, to put all of these immigration arrestees there, and because of his big campaign that he's got going. So to try to open up Alcatraz financially is not possible. Experts and historians have expressed serious doubts whether or not the plan is feasible. To be frank, at first they actually thought this was a joke, opening up Alcatraz. So Hugh Hurwitz, who served as acting director of the BOP between May 2018 and August of 2019, told the BBC recently in an interview, "It's not realistic to think that you can repair Alcatraz. As we all know now, it's a national park area. You'd have to tear the whole thing up and start over because of all the problems with it. The building has been crumbling, all of the buildings, for decades, and of course, because it is a national park museum, they fix it back up and try to fix it up so the visitors can see it." And here's another thing: is the cells in which a 6-foot person, they can't even stand up in the cells if you're over 6 feet. There's no security upgrades, no cameras. They'd have to just do so much to Alcatraz to get it back up and open it up. And so, as you know, there's been some films made there. That's about it. But there's no way that Alcatraz could be used as a federal prison again, and to put people in there. It's just one of Trump's little pipe dreams that he's been having. But as I said, here's the thing that's going on in my top story here that I want to talk about. Trump has been farming out to third parties, and some of these people have very close connections to the Trump administration because they've contributed to the campaign, and that's why he's doing this. He's been opening up several scandal-ridden prisons quietly, and they're run by profits. And that's what's going on. As these private prisons are opening up, they'll be billing the federal government to house all of these so-called illegal immigrants that ICE is rounding up, and they're putting them in these prisons. Sure, they're shipping some off to El Salvador and other countries, but they're also being housed right here in the United States in private prisons that is run by people who have contributed to the Trump campaign. One of the key prisons, private corporations that is running this is CoreCivic. Now, CoreCivic has given the Trump campaign $500,000 and more for his inauguration that he had. And they're highlighting the industry support that would be reopening a notorious family detention center in South Texas under a admitted contract with the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Aha! Did you catch that? They're reopening a private prison in Texas under the nod from Donald Trump to house families. And you can imagine the tab that's going to be sent monthly to the federal government. And see, as you know, they want all this money in the new budget proposal to pay for all of this to these private corporations. And that's why the Republicans, they want to bolster the budget for military defense and for ICE and cut everything else for people like senior citizens, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, HUD, education. See, they'll do all those cuts so they can get the budget to where they can pay to put, illegal immigrants in jail. Now, the particular facility that I just talked about was built in 2014. It'll house up to 2,400 people, including children. It has been shut down last year to save costs after years of reports suggesting poor treatment to these inmates. And one toddler that was in there died due to a lack of medical care. But Trump doesn't care about that. They're the illegal immigrants, and I'm sorry children are dying, but, it's a cost of doing business, casualties of war, as they like to say. The reopening is part of a trend. CoreCivic isn't the only company, though, bringing back facilities. We are at the beginning of what looks like a private prison boom again, as the groups profit for offer President Donald Trump's plan for mass deportation. They are set to make billions with a B. As the Washington Post recently reported, the GEO Group and the CoreCivic stand to benefit in particular from Trump's immigration plans. The companies hold at least 16 vacant facilities that can be reopened within months for mass detention and deportation. The GEO Group announced in late February that it would be reopening Delaney Hall in Newark, New Jersey. Aha, see? There's a connection with this recent protest as a massive immigration detention center with 1,000 beds. And in California, ICE is considering repurposing and reopening the women's prison, FCI, in Dublin. Closed last year due to a mass sexual abuse. Women were sexually abused there, and they closed it, but now they're going to reopen it for immigration detention. In Baldwin, Michigan, ICE and the GEO Group have expressed interest in reopening North Lake Correctional Facility, a former private prison shuttered in 2022. A Biden administration ordered that particular detention facility closed because of all this. In Leavenworth, Kansas, CoreCivic looks like they're going to partner with ICE to reopen yet another shuttered private prison. Documents obtained by the ACLU revealed as of February 27th, ICE held 43,759 detainees, according to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, a nonpartisan data gathering organization. Trump is putting pressure on ICE to increase those numbers, arrest every day. See, he thinks he was elected to just get rid of everybody and bring back jobs in the United States, which is not happening, and his tariffs. And yes, you probably got the mega base of, yeah, good for you, man. You're just getting all these people out of here. But as you get rid of the illegal immigrants, as I said, only less than 10% so far have been proven to have any kind of criminal record. The rest are just people that, even people that are born here in the United States. And again, he wants to get rid of birthright citizenship as well. I don't care if you're born here, you're not a citizen as far as I'm concerned. Your last name is Rodriguez or Hernandez. So you're not a United States citizen. It's just crazy. Now, his administration has already fired one ICE director for not deporting enough people. He wants people deported. In the community surrounding these new jails for migrants, activists, and politicians are fighting back. In Newark, where the GEO Group stands to make $1.2 billion by reopening Delaney Hall, the Immigrant Rights Organization Make the Road is planning a rally against that jail on just recently and to protest these. So people are not happy with this. See, here's the thing. You're going to get all these people in the detention facilities. So what happens if you do that? Let's say you do put all these people in these prisons. And let's say there's a security breach and all of these migrants who are supposed to be huge criminals break out of jail right here in the United States. What happens? Yeah. So you've got to really think hard about all of this. So all of these prisons that are now opening up, you've got huge problems. You really, really do. And this is why. These private prisons, these companies have had a horrid record of running these private prisons. Corrections Corporation of America, which is now CoreCivic, but back when they were called the CCA, in 1986, they had some huge problems. They've had problems of abuse. They've had problems of not treating prisoners fairly, because they are a for-profit prison. Now, CoreCivic is in Tennessee, and it gets $233 million annually for running prisons there. And in 2023, CoreCivic brought in $1.9 billion in revenue with a net profit of $188 million. Now, just think how much that's going to jump as they open up these other prisons for Donald Trump to put illegal immigrants in, if that's what you want to call them. It's just absolutely scary. And I don't know what we're going to do. But you all need to be aware of how many of these private prisons are now opening up, and they are putting mothers, kids, dads, into these prison facilities, and you can just imagine how they're going to be treated. And if anybody, like say Democrats or somebody, state senator, wants to go and just do a checkup on these and see how these prisons are being run, they're not going to be admitted. We're turning into all of these, you can't call anything else, they're prison camps right here in the United States for these illegal immigrants. The private prisons are going to make billions off of our tax dollars, and the illegal immigrants, they're probably not going to be treated very well, as you probably will. They're prisoners, just like our American prisoners aren't treated very well. And like I said, I totally get it. If you've done something wrong and you're a prisoner, you've got a federal felony record, or you're a bad person, and you're in prison, that's basically where you need to be. But like I said, literally probably 80% of these illegal immigrants have no record. They're just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They've got a Hispanic last name, and therefore they've been arrested. And if they do away with due process, which is the next step, they're just going to lock them up and throw away the key. They're not going to be able to get in front of a judge or anybody else. And this is not the United States of America. This is not the land of the free and home of the brave anymore. It's getting scary. And I go back again to that tablet that's on the Statue of Liberty. We might as well just take the Statue of Liberty and dump it in the water. Bring me your poor, you're hungry. And I know, well, if it got into the country illegally, this wouldn't all happen. But now we're not even letting anybody into the United States anymore. They've done away with that. They're pulling, green cards on everybody. They're throwing students out who are just this close to getting their doctorate or their bachelor's degree. And if they're from another country, they're saying, get the hell out. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. This is why a lot of countries are starting to raise their eyebrows at us and, having second thoughts. It is scary. It really, really is. Anyway, that's my edition of The Right Has Left. Thank you for joining me on this particular podcast. Until next time, you try to have a safe and productive day.